I think funerals are particularly important for several reasons. First of all, I think it's very important that the family confront the reality of death. And funerals are the one opportunity they have to do that, both in seeing their deceased loved one in the casket, as well as being able to intermingle with friends, other family members that they might not have seen, and it gives them an opportunity to really confront what has happened. I also think it's very important that people in some way recognize that a life of value has been lived, that they celebrate their loved one's life, what he or she brought to this world. And that is very important to the whole process of accepting and adjusting to the death. We have always felt here at A.J. Desmond Sons that funerals are extremely important for family members to have. It's important that they go through some sort of a public ceremony. First of all, they need to confront the reality of the death. They need to actually see their loved one in a casket. They need to intermingle with other family members, with friends, to really come to grips and accept what has happened. It really helps them confront the whole situation. We also think it's very important because in the whole bereavement process and the whole grief process, it's very important to have some sort of a recognition that a life of value has been lived. Celebrate the life. Celebrate who that person was, and somehow realize that this person's life on earth really benefited an awful lot of people and touched an awful lot of people. Some families choose not to have a public ceremony. Studies show that those families have the most difficult time adjusting to the death. We see it here in our own grief program. Some of the families that need the grief program the most have had the least amount of ceremony. When the death occurs, sometimes having a ceremony is hard to do. You don't want to confront the death. You don't want to face it. The easiest thing is to walk away. In our society, we walk away from death. We don't discuss death. We don't confront death. So it's very easy and very tempting not to have a ceremony. On the other hand, quite frankly, that's about the worst decision that a family can make. They need to have something. They need to have some recognition and that a life of value has been lived. And quite frankly, we think the best way they do that is to confront the whole situation of death with a casket where they actually see the deceased. Children as young as the age of 3 should be a part of at least some of the whole funeral process. Whether it's just a short time at the funeral home, whether it's at the ceremony, depends on the child, obviously, but death is a natural part of life. If children are sheltered from this, all of a sudden they wonder why. Questions go in their mind. On the other hand, if they're a part of it, it all becomes very natural. They have a lot of questions. Some of the questions can be quite difficult. Some of the questions can, quite frankly, be very humorous. But that is their questions, and they need to be answered at their level. But having them as part of the funeral is the best way to really have children start to develop a healthy attitude toward death and consequently a healthy attitude toward life. Over the last few years, funeral customs have changed. Visitation hours are less, ceremonies are simpler, and some of that works just fine. When I first started many years ago, people did the same thing. As soon as we knew what religious tradition or ethnic tradition they were, we knew exactly what was going to happen. No longer. People choose what they want. They decide what they want. Everything is very individual. Everything is very personalized. And quite frankly, that is much more meaningful, particularly to the generations alive today. So they don't necessarily have to do what their grandfathers did. On the other hand, you might not need 3 days of visiting, but if there's going to be a certain number of people coming, you may need a day of visiting. Or sometimes if it's a real large group, 2 days of visiting. If it's an elderly person with very little family, very few friends, then you may say, we'll do everything in the one day. We'll have a short visitation, we'll have a ceremony, and then that'll be enough. And quite frankly, in those situations, that is enough. If a family recognizes the death, sees their loved one peacefully in a casket, outside of the tubes of the hospital or the trauma from an accident, and whatever their religious or ethnic traditions are, have some sort of a meaningful ceremony to them, then I think they have at least begun the process of confronting the death and taking steps back to a normal life.